It is my current goal to beat the game of Pokemon Yellow every single week using all of the 151 Pokedex entries in a new solo challenge each time. And today, we're taking a look at the Pokemon Muck. Now, actually, today was supposed to be Bellsprout, or really about a day ago. I was editing the video for this week, and I was about halfway through looking at Bellsprout when I thought, well, wait a minute, it's October. We should be doing something that's creepy crawly or something like that. So I decided to scrap Bellsprout for a little bit and go for something that felt a little bit more in the theme. And one of the themes that I think Halloween and kind of spooky, scary stuff has is kind of grimy, oozy, slime kind of stuff. I mean, Nickelodeon was all over that kind of stuff in like the early 90s and early 2000s with, their commercial breaks for young boys of, get the secret of the ooze. Well, actually, that's Teenage Mutant Turtles. But anyway, the point, though, is that Muck kind of, to me, gives that slime feel. He, at least especially in this picture on the left-hand side, definitely gives the impression of a somewhat scarier, grosser monster, Some of these Pokemon are cuddly and cute and adorable, and some of them are like, oh, that's so cool. But this guy does kind of look like if you ran into that, in the sewer, why would you be in the sewer? But if you were like on the street and suddenly that was coming at you almost like a moving, living wave of sludge, I think you'd be pretty terrified. I think you'd be like, oh, gross. You'd probably smell it before you saw it, but, maybe that would give you the clue that it's time to get a move on. Speaking of moves, we've got a few moves here for Muck. One of the big concerns that we have for this Pokemon is the fact that it is a Poison-type Pokemon in a Generation 1 game, which does mean that it's going to be very weak to quite a few Ground-type Pokemon that we're going to run into. It's going to be a big issue. There's also going to be a lot of Psychic types and also a lot of other poison users, and we're not going to be effective against them. So there's going to be some of those typical concerns for Muck, but overall, the stats aren't awful. The stats are pretty good. I mean, at the very least, the attack is quite nice. He does hit very hard, and that makes sense. I feel like, he's got a lot of weight to him. I am a little surprised that his defense isn't a little higher just because of that, I feel like if you're made of ooze, you could take a hit, because you don't really have a form, right? But he does start off with the moves of Pound, Disable, and Poison Gas, and I don't know, I still kind of feel a little up in the air about how I feel about how, kind of utilitarian those moves are, or how easily you can kind of make something happen with those. One of the biggest issues is that to some extent you could just get through Brock quickly by, poisoning his Pokemon. The problem is that it's a 55% accuracy move, and you have to hit them each time, and he has 4 full heals per Pokemon. So you would have to hit them 8 times and then 1 more time each, so a total of 10 uses for it to start doing real chip damage, and that's going to be a problem just because by then they're going to tackle you, right? So, you really do need to have some sort of plan to get in there. Disable can be kind of helpful with some of the stuff early game, but Disable's not going to be helpful later in the game. And the bigger reason for that is just because of, for one thing, right, it's just sort of using up a move to stop another move from being used. And maybe sometimes that could be helpful in a situation like Hydro Pump later on in the game, right? But one of the big things to consider here is that it doesn't work the same way in this generation as it does in more modern games. In the more modern games, Disable goes after the last move used by your opponent. And of course, in this game, that wouldn't be helpful for getting rid of Hydro Pump, but what the big issue here is that it just goes for a random move within their move pool. So you could get the move that you're aiming for immediately, but you also could actually take away one of the only other moves that they could use and then lock them into the worst possible move for you. So it's really not a gamble that I think is really well worth it in this game. Really in any generation, but especially in Gen 1, I feel like the random part of it just feels too, random, right? And I know what you're thinking. You're going, Colin, why are you focusing so much on the first 3 moves in the move pool? Right? Yes, okay, you were starting the game with more moves than most Pokemon typically do, right? But that's a good thing. You'll have some stuff to use, and then eventually, you'll learn some more moves. You'll have some of those TMs on the right-hand side to help build out the learn set. You're going to be fine, right? Why focus so much on those first 3? Well, let me tell you, it's because if you take another look at that list, it's all we have access to for about 30 levels. We start at level 5, right? But then, okay, look at that. The next move that you learn is at level 30. The problem is that move that you learn at level 30 is a move that you start the game with. It's just there on the set because if you technically have a Grimer and then you level it up, you get it at level 30. But the thing that you look at here is that really we don't get another move until level 33. Now, here's then yet another problem, right? I don't use evasive moves. I think that that's one of those rules that other creators use that I also have adopted. I do think it's kind of cheating. So level 33 is not going to be a time for us to get anything. So level 37 will be the first time that we can learn a move naturally that we will actually want to have and keep and use. That is 32 levels that we will have to go with this Pokemon before we get a really good stab move. And if this is your first time hearing that, that is a same type attack bonus. So that's going to be a pretty major thing for us to have, but that's 37, that's 32 levels. At this point in the video, that is 25 more levels. Got a long ways to go. So we're obviously grinding here, and that's actually going to give me just enough time to talk about the last couple of things here on this list. We're not going to really want Screech. Harden will be good, and eventually Acid Armor will be even better. And we'll talk more about those moves once we get them, because it's going to be more beneficial to show you why those moves are going to be so crucial for this run. Outside of that, though, Thunderbolt and Mega Drain are probably the only real big things that I'm looking at. Fire Blast I could take, but it's such limited PP. I don't know. We'll see. But what we will also see is how all of these ideas, these pros and these cons that I've mentioned, how they come into play. At this point, I think we've waxed poetic enough. And so let's go see about the first gym badge with Brock's Gym in Pewter City. But first, we have to stop by the junior trainer battle, where he says, "You're light years away from fighting Brock," and then we proceed to steamroll his Diglett and his Sandshrew. Thank you for playing. It doesn't measure time, it measures distance. Yeah, man, stay in school. Now, we go up against Brock, and there's a little bit of still this sort of exploratory phase kind of thing happening with Muck. I'm not really a big poison type guy, I'll be honest, and Muck is not a Pokemon that I think I've ever used. Maybe in like a Nuzlocke if something is like on a randomizer, and that's kind of like my only option maybe, but I've never gone out of my way to get a Grimer and or Muck and use them. So this is a lot of kind of figuring out the different puzzle pieces and how this Pokemon operates. And in this particular run here, I am really going for it. I have a pretty high attack, I feel like, but obviously because it resists the move of Pound, it's going to be kind of a hard way to get through Onix, especially since I can't lower his defense at all. So what I'm going to attempt here on my second run against Brock, I have already taken my first reset, but I don't mind it. That seems okay to me. We're going to try kind of combining the two ideas. I think we're going to try and brute force through the Geodude. And then what we will do is we will attempt to go for this poison gas run, because he's gonna constantly try and get it in. But I think that if I can hit him with a poison gas and then start having him use Bide or Bind, perhaps it will kind of get stuck in a loop where he has to let it go for a little while and has to let them have this moment of poison hitting them. But of course, he still has all of these full heals, so it's not really going the way that I'm looking, and he is still hitting me with Bind, which does, of course, keep me from attacking, and he gets to keep doing damage to me. Okay, well, that is unfortunately another reset. But what's going to happen on this run is very interesting to me. And that is because I know I talked a lot of smack about using the move Disable, especially in Generation 1. However, I think the only time it is ever helpful, maybe, is specifically this fight. If you can get lucky enough, you can use Disable after Onyx has used Bide. And if that is the case, it is now locked in, trying to use Bide. But it's disabled, so it just constantly waits, and it waits, and it waits. It's just sitting there, holding off. It can't do anything. He can't use an item. It is no longer disabled now. But now it's taking basically none of the damage, like almost none of that mattered. So in the end, I make through a little bit of luck and a lot of kind of contemplating the different options. We play tested a few and we got the right one. And so we get to move on to the next rival fight. No plesting. Plesting? That was me trying to say play testing again. Well, no plesting here. On this one, it's just pound away. We've still got 16 levels left to go before we have anything of use. So yeah, it's just going to be hit them, hit your enemy, and then get out. And as you can see, turns out that plan works out pretty nicely against the Rival 2's team. And so after going up to Nugget Bridge and going all the way up to Bill and getting my SSN ticket, I make my way back down to Cerulean because before we can go and, mess some stuff up on a cruise liner, we've got to get a gym badge because I don't necessarily want to have to backtrack for it. I got to come back here to go to the Rock Tunnel, but I think you get where I'm going. At this point, we're strong enough, I think, that we can take on Misty with a level 25 muck. That seems fine. So we're going to go for poison gas, although we do get some pretty bad luck there. Multiple times of it not affecting it for, whatever reason, means that we take a lot of unnecessary damage here in the beginning. And so now we are getting the poison on the Starmie, but the issue is that it outspeeds us. So it does live with just the tiniest sliver of health. Okay, well, live and let live. We come back, and when you look at the tape, you'll notice that technically I started that last fight at not fully healed health, right? I did go in to that battle with 13 missing HP. Now, did that kind of make or break the situation? I really don't know. So just in case we heal up and then we go back in, this time we get to the Starmie with much more health. And a lot of that is just kind of the luck of not having so many missed moves and taking some extra damage. But also, again, we were fully healed. So that means that we can go up against Starmie, and it doesn't really go for its harder hitting moves. And so we kind of get to just sort of eke that win out. Next up is, of course, the SS Anne. And we are 10 levels before we would learn another move. So this is the perfect time to make our pit stop at one of our favorite rooms in the game, and that is this room, the second door to the left on that first floor, that first landing, so that we can pick up the move Body Slam and add it to our learn set. We're also going to move everything around for now because it's just sort of, why not? It's going to be the main move for a bit until we get access to the sludge. So let's get this in a much easier, fast place to use it. Now I can just press and hold my trigger button and bam. There are basically just 1, 2, 3, and 4. That'll be Eevee. The rival is no more. Now we're going to go pick up the move Cut so that we can go face off against Lieutenant Surge. Okay, there it is. There's the moment for you. And so now with Surge out of the way, it is time to move on to Celadon. And by the time we get to Celadon, my prediction from earlier was correct, right? I knew that it wasn't going to be until after the third gym and where we learn a new move. Obviously, we learned one from a TM right before the third gym, but that's not the same thing, right? So here we are at this gym. We level up to level 37 right there, and we get Sludge. This is going to be huge for us. with a 97 power move, because obviously it's not 97 to begin with, but it is after the same type attack bonus because it's a poison move, we're a poison type. It gets a little bit of a boosty boost, and now we are doing much more damage with this move with a high attack power as well. You'll notice that even the Pokemon that it's not super effective against, I mean, obviously it is for Tangela, it's the only straight grass Pokemon monotype. But then even with Weeping Belt, right, it wasn't super effective, but it did one-shot it. Now, with Gloom, obviously, it's not quite strong enough to take it out, but we're also resistant to what's happening while we're even asleep, so eventually we wake up still with plenty of health, plenty of time, one more hit takes it out, and so we can move on to the next section. Muck kind of has that thing that has happened time and time again. It's a tale as old as time. There are a lot of Pokemon that struggle in terms of time frames because they have maybe, let's say, a very bad stat, or perhaps they just have really bad moves and they need the TMs desperately, or whatever the case may be. Especially in Generation 1, I think this is a very common struggle. There wasn't a lot of memory space on the cards, so there's a lot of weird limitations that I don't think you really notice as much, at the very least, when you have a full team and have your type coverage. But when you're doing a solo challenge, you start to notice some of those cracks just a little bit more. And so Muck has not even necessarily a slow start, but definitely a slower start. But once we get Sludge in the learn set here, you'll notice that time starts to just absolutely fly by. We are making huge strides, and this is an even bigger moment here, right? We just got Harden. Well, okay, maybe it's not a bigger moment, but it is a nearly as important moment. You see, in this generation, you'll notice that with the first badge and the third badge, we have little icons next to our attack and our defense, meaning that those are the stats that currently have a boost to them from those badges. So all the odd numbered badges. So when we beat Koga, we'll get one for our speed. And the big thing here is that it is a boost. It's a 1/8 boost. And every time you use a move in this generation that changes any stat, it doesn't matter which stat it is, it then reapplies and adds on to the current number that boost again. So we keep getting an 1/8 boosted to our attack every time I boost my defense here. So you'll see that we are now doing a lot more damage to Koga's, team here. The only problem that we're facing is that we're still a little underleveled compared to them. And so we just don't have enough HP to get through. When all of them have Psychic, it is pretty easy for them to take me on. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's a tried and true situation for us. We say, okay, we took 3 resets. Let's not sit here and hope just for the exact perfect moment. It might not happen for a while, so let's move on for just a little bit. We're going to go to Silphco. We're going to go through the whole last little details of the Team Rocket situation, and we're going to take on a bunch of different trainers throughout. You'll see that I've definitely leveled up a few times. I got a couple key items, and then I've gone here to fight Rival 5, Rival Vival, as many people call him. And yeah, that was kind of questionable there at the end. I think actually he could have won that fight, maybe, but luckily he did not. Obviously, he used a couple moves at the very end that weren't quite as strong, and so Muck overtakes. We do a quick heal in pocket this time, and then we move on to the last iteration of the Team Rocket trio, fighting through the Weezing, the Arbok, and the Meowth. Next, we move on to Giovanni, who has the evolved form of Meowth, a much more superior cat in Persian, which we have seen here on the channel already, so we know how good Persian can be. But luckily, it's not, being trained by or used by a trainer that's quite as good as me. So we take that on. It's done for. The big thing that we have now is we're starting to see one of the kind of late game problems for Muck, which is Pokemon that definitely resist it and also, again, will have moves that are super effective against us. Right now, Rhyhorn doesn't have anything in that regard, but it will later for sure. And same for Nidoqueen. Very easy for us to lose to it later. Here, it's just sort of like okay, the type advantage kind of thing is not there, or it's there, but it's not being used. You know what I mean? So that's kind of a tougher fight, but we're seeing the cracks in the wall here. But now that we're up a few more levels, we make it back to Koga's gym. We're now level 51, which is a pretty good number to have compared to this team, which continuously goes up in level, which is also kind of a crazier scenario to look at. And even at 51, we can still get taken out by Psychic. Psychic is a very powerful move. It has, obviously a type advantage over us. It's super effective. And so even with all this stuff, our special's not like amazing. It's not terrible either, but you'll see that basically this is just one of those things where we're getting hit with a stat that we're not very good with, and it's super effective. So some of those Pokemon, specifically the last Venonat and the Venomoth, are capable of doing tremendous damage. Here is a critical moment, though. He could have used Psychic on either of those two moves, or really, I guess both, but, on either of those, it probably would have ended that fight, and again, in his favor. But I think that he throws by going for Leech Life, which is still super effective there, but not quite in the same way. So now that we have that badge under our belt and a boost to our speed, which it still is not good enough to outspeed Alakazam, we then go to Sabrina, and there's going to be a couple more resets. We've already talked about this. This is another situation of, actually the same thing that we just saw at Koga, really. So of course we just talked about it. Psychic and the Psychic type moves are pretty devastating for Muck. And even though we're leveling up, we're not leveling up faster than our opponent necessarily. We're still pretty close in level at this point. So the bell curve is starting to kind of have a downward slope at this point. But it doesn't really matter, because even with the slope, we're still in this game. We have defeated Sabrina with only a couple of resets, and now we get to move on to Blaine, who I don't know why I stayed in this fight for just a couple more turns. Very unlike me, I think. Once you get the burn, at least for a Pokemon like Muck, who's a physical attacker, get out, just reset. It's too late, right? The burn is going to cut your attack in half, and no amount of hardens is going to fix and change that. You are in a deficit, you're done for. Now, we are trying to avoid that burn again, and we get a lucky poison off twice, actually, but we have to be a little cautious because a Fire Blast there could have easily done us in, but luckily it does not today. Blaine only takes one reset, and we move on to Giovanni for the last time. Now, I did fight one last guy last minute just because I realized I'd like to actually level up before I go into the fight. And after a couple fights there, I realized, okay, actually what I desperately want is I want Acid Armor instead of Harden. Acid Armor is a much more effective move. It's much faster. It's going to give us the boosts that we need quicker and with much more HP left over. However, of course, we've got situations like critical hits, which in this generation completely ignore any of the stat boosts or decreases or anything like that. So, anytime they get a critical hit, of course, I'm going to instantly die. And one of the issues that we've also faced here is that a Pokemon like Diglett or Persian, for example, do have a really high rate of critical hits. So, you have to be really cautious with them, especially. Now, we obviously are taking way more resets here. We're now at basically double, effectively, of where we were previously. I'm going to do one run where I attempt Mega Drain, but Mega Drain is really not the move, even though I can boost myself up and then I can heal a little bit with that. It's just not doing enough damage. Mega Drain, it's just not enough. If there was a Giga Drain TM in this generation, we probably could see a good use of that, and maybe that would have stayed on the learn set until the end of the game. But this is actually one of those rare moments where I actually think Body Slam is going to do us better overall throughout. For the most part in this game, anything that is weak to Thunderbolt is also weak to Mega Drain and vice versa. Again, the only exception here being ground type Pokemon. But for the most part, that's kind of the case in terms of the things that we're seeing us needing to use those moves commonly against. So, we're fine with Body Slam. We're going to have Thunderbolt as our one special move, and then Sludge is there to also do an incredible amount of damage. The Acid Armor for the badge boost glitch, and eventually we eke it out again. A very close call, in my opinion, but luckily with all those boosts and just the right planning, no mismanagement. We did have a couple of mismanaged moves in there, here and there. And listen, it happens. You know, we don't always make the best choices where we go, well, what if I try this? And then you go, oh, right. That's why you plessed. So then you move on to the Rival 6. This is the last time that he is going to be our rival and not a champion. This is the moment where you kind of see the hint, basically, right? Like, this is effectively the team you will be facing, though maybe not necessarily in this order. The middle 4 Pokemon all get switched out, right? His lead stays the same, his ace stays the same, and that's fine. But effectively, you know, these are the Pokemon. 2 of them will still evolve between here and the end, and some of them do not have the most dangerous moves that they could have on their learn set just yet. So it is kind of easy sometimes to win on that first fight. Sometimes you don't need more than one round against him here. The champion battle is a different case. But after you drop off all your Pokemon and then you use a couple last bit of your rare candies, you can get up to level 65. We're looking pretty good. 65 is, I would say, on other Pokemon, probably a much lower level than I would normally attempt. But for an evolved Pokemon, I feel like 65 is more than enough. So we're going to head into this fight. We've used a couple acid armors against Lorelei, and Thunderbolt should hopefully take care of pretty much everything else. Jinx obviously is not a water dual type. It's the only one that does not. And then you get to go in. Also, another interesting fact is just the fact that Slowbro is not an ice type at all either. So some weird type crossings here and there. A lot of the water type, water ice, and then one random just ice, well, ice and psychic, and then one just water and psychic. Peculiar sets here. And then Bruno, you know, is also an interesting one because he's not really a ground rock type, but he's also not a fighting type. He's a even mix, which is probably one of the main reasons why a lot of people call him the hiker, because the type of Pokemon that he's rolling with here are certainly the types of Pokemon that we have commonly seen with hikers throughout the region. A fighting type of some sort, and then an Onix or a Geodude. So yeah, it just kind of feels like he's continued his hiker's friend's path, but this time he made it all the way to the Elite Four. I guess good for him, but at the end of the day, he's nothing to shake a stick at. Although this is one of the harder fights for Bruno that I remember in recent days. We didn't lose, but it definitely took longer to get through him than it normally does. Speaking of a Pokemon trainer, though, that can take a long time to get through is Agatha. And Agatha's going to have the same problem that we had with Koga, right? She's a ghost type trainer, quote unquote, but really every single one of her Pokemon has a poison type. And that is one of those things where, okay, that doesn't seem too bad. You're also poison. But 3 of those Pokemon, because they are ghost types, can learn Psychic. And as we know, just like with Koga, the poison types using Psychic, it's like keeping your enemies closer, I suppose, in some fashion. We are getting to the end of this battle, and she absolutely throws that fight. Are you kidding me? Using Supersonic like 4 times in a row? I get that you have, you know, a Psychic move, quote unquote, within that, but that was a throw and a half. I definitely should have had one more reset there, but we don't. I guess I kind of spoke too soon, right? Because then we go up against Lance and he kind of proves, no, you're going to take one. And that is mostly just because at the end of the day, his Pokemon are just so beefy. They are so bulky and powerful. And one of them is extremely fast, you know, the Aerodactyl. Gyarados is constantly a problem for most Pokemon at the end of the day, just because it's got so much strength in it. And Hydro Pump can really just cruise right through your HP bar. Now, we get through the rest of his team all the way up until his ace of Dragonite. The heal is a little unfortunate. Luckily, he has to recharge still, and so we get to get in there with 17 health. It's kind of like C's get degrees. That's kind of what happened there. I don't know if we necessarily earned that one or deserved that one. I guess, you know, you deserve it if you win it, right? But my point, though, is that that was a barely type situation. Okay, and then we're back to that same problem that we've spoken about before with, like, for example, Giovanni, right? Sandslash, now his critical hit rate is not nearly as high for moves like Earthquakes. He does have Slash, which has a higher crit rate overall, but he is getting critical hits left and right. Even at the somewhat lower percentage, he's getting them constantly. So it doesn't matter if I use my acid armor and get my defenses up, ready to go for the rest of the fight. He's still kind of crunching right through all of my health. Having something that you are super weak against first and foremost. So it's like the biggest issue is that, okay, it's not like I can even really set up against anyone else. The next Pokemon that I could really afford to take some time with is maybe Cloyster. And that's after 3 Pokemon in a row that have something that could be pretty bad for me. Now, granted, Exeggutor does not have a really strong move, but it does have the ability to Leech Seed me and then put me to sleep, and I would just sort of slowly, over time, chip damage out. And so we don't want that either. So luckily, at this point, we have set up twice. I did not go up to +6, but with that, I think we're doing okay. Our speed is 177, so we are outspeeding everything. And we are hitting pretty heavily with 280. The pin missile is the only thing that he has that's super effective against me, but it's such a little damage thing that with just a little bit of health, Muck wins it out and gets one final level up. So with 19 resets at 1 hour 35 minutes, we had 20 resets. I forgot that I had to reset my background. That broke for a moment there at the very end. So we had 20 resets. And that is the moment, though, where we see that this Pokemon, okay, maybe he's a little grimy, maybe he's a little slimy, but he did pretty good. I feel pretty good about this guy. I think that, like, now that I have a little bit more familiarity with him, there's 1 or 2 things that I might change up a little bit here and there. But yeah, I think that, like, the really interesting start with having to kind of play around with the Sable all the way up until getting into other glitches like the badge boost, just a really interesting Mon and a really interesting run, in my opinion. I hope you also found it interesting. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far and haven't already, please consider giving this a subscribe, a like, a comment, a share. Anytime you interact with a smaller creator like myself, it really helps us out a lot. And I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year, so you could be a part of that journey. And speaking of journeys, that does it for Muck, but I will see you next week for another spooky solo challenge in Pokemon Yellow.